Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump has said that the United States needs Greenland for national security and to strengthen NATO's effectiveness. Without it, Russia or China could gain control, and anything less than US ownership is unacceptable. Independent human rights groups have stated that the death toll from the crackdown on protests in Iran has crossed more than 2,000 people. A senior Iranian official has warned that the United States against military action, saying Iran would strike American bases if attacked. Tehran has reportedly asked its regional leaders, including Turkey, to prevent any military escalation by the United States. Bill and Hillary Clinton has said that they will not be testifying in the House Oversight Committee's Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Chairman of the House Oversight Committee threatens to hold the Clintons in contempt of Congress for refusing to testify. US President Trump has now stated that a US takeover will be great for Venezuela as American oil companies formulate their re-entry strategy into the Venezuelan oil market. According to French official statements, France's Interior Ministry has banned 10 British far-right activists from entering or remaining in France after determining their actions could incite violence and seriously disrupt public order. Trump has said that day of reckoning and retribution coming to Minnesota, where 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good was killed by an ICE agent as protests continue in Minneapolis. Apple signs multi-year deal with Google to fix Siri with Gemini, which the company promised at WWDC in 2024, but has since been delayed. Apple had promised 3 big upgrades to Siri to take it on par with rivals like Gemini and ChatGPT. According to a U.S. official, the United States is withdrawing some personnel from major U.S. bases in the Middle East. The official says this move is a precaution amid rising regional tensions. Meanwhile, Russia and Iran are moving ahead with bilateral agreements despite global pressure. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow will continue working with Tehran to implement agreements reached by their presidents. He has added that no third party can change the nature of Russian-Iranian relations, which he said benefit both countries and have been put into action through real projects. Let's listen in.
Надо просто работать и реализовывать те договоренности, которые есть между нами и Исламской Республикой Иран, между Россией и всеми другими нашими торговыми и экономическими партнерами. Когда такая мощная страна, как Соединенные Штаты, действует подобными нечистоплотными методами нечистоплотной конкуренции, это говорит только о том, что конкурентные позиции Соединенных Штатов последовательно ухудшаются. Я не думаю, что какая-либо третья сторона может изменить принципиальный характер отношений между Москвой и Тегераном. Этот характер опирается на договоренности, которые были достигнуты между президентами Российской Федерации и Исламской Республики Иран. Он отвечает интересам двух государств, двух народов. Этот характер воплощен в целом ряде практических проектов.
Rights group HRANA has verified 2,403 protesters' deaths and 147 government-related fatalities. This comes as Tehran has warned neighbors hosting U.S. troops that it would strike if America intervenes. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Andrew Latham. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, looking at the Iranian protests, how do you analyze the situation? And also, do you think that it hasn't affected like US and Western countries eyeing this and, warning Iran against anything, against protesters? It hasn't affected Russia at all. Do you think it has, or what's your analysis?
Well, there are two elements to the answer to that question, one of which is that although there's plenty of anger in the streets in Tehran and other cities, there aren't all the ingredients for a successful revolution against this theocratic regime. There's plenty of misery. The regime's legitimacy has been eroded by its failure to deliver on the economy and defense and things like that. But there's no alternative leadership waiting in the wings. There's no fracturing of the existing leadership. There seems to be a united front there. And there's no shared vision of what would come after this theocratic regime. And against that backdrop, it's unclear what a military strike on the part of the US would accomplish. It would add to the misery and it would further degrade the legitimacy, but it wouldn't conjure up a leadership alternative. And then if we shift the focus to Russia a little bit, Russia and Iran, and to a lesser extent China, and a few other countries are all in the same boat. They are opposed to the American-led international order. They're opposed to American interference in what they consider to be their internal affairs, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, the protests, and China, Taiwan, and therefore are in the same boat. And to use a somewhat trite and hackneyed metaphor, it's either they hang together or they hang separately. And right now they have chosen to hang together, which is why Russia and Iran, which, by the way, historically in the long run have not been close friends. They've competed for power and influence in the Caucasus, for example. The Russians and the Brits divided Persia once upon a time amongst themselves during the colonial era. There's no love lost historically, but there's plenty of love there at the moment because they have shared interests and they face a shared threat, and they're likely to stick together through this episode.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And how do you see, today we saw Iran call on Turkey to not let, or to talk US out of attacking Iran or intensifying any pressure. Do you think that Turkey is capable of doing anything, like mediating?
Well, under President Erdogan, Turkey has tried to position itself as a very important regional actor, as a regional great power, as it were. And that has to do with exerting influence in Turkey as near abroad. But it also has to do with playing on this relationship with the United States within NATO. But historically, there have been close ties, strained a bit under Erdogan, but still there. And so it would be in President Erdogan's interest, and perhaps the interest of Turkey more broadly, to be in a position to arbitrate some kind of deal. Whether that's possible remains to be seen. I rather suspect not. I think President Erdogan has a rather inflated sense of Turkey's Istanbul's role in the region. And this may be a test case. I rather suspect that if he reaches out to President Trump, he's likely to get either rebuffed outright or a polite thanks but no thanks, because I think President Trump has already thought through, to the extent that he does think these things through, what he wants to accomplish in Iran, and I don't think Istanbul is going to be able to dissuade him.
Right. And today we also saw this news come in of this particular individual who is in a death sentence, who's put in a death sentence, or maybe the execution has not happened yet, but he's put into this death sentence, Irfan Soltani. So do you think that if that actually happens, it might have the same effect of how Mahsa Amini became like a face of big change in Iran, but it did not end up in regime change. It did change some things within the enforcement of hijab towards Iranian girls, but that was all. What do you think?
Well, this regime has taken the usual approach that authoritarian regimes take. On the one hand, it will make concessions where it's necessary, where it's tactically useful, and on the other hand, it will crack down where it's tactically necessary and useful. And that backing off on the hijab mandate was tactically necessary and was a relatively small price to pay. The broader point which you raised, of course, is the role of symbols, symbolic personalities in these kind of events. Symbols are important. They can catalyze, they can focus, they can serve as rallying points. They may, in fact, push the needle one way or the other. But there's no alternative to an actual Khomeini or a Mandela or a Valença or a Gandhi or one of these figures that can actually lead change in a constructive direction. So the symbols, the martyrdom of these particular individuals, as I said, is important as a catalyst, as an enabler, as a focal point, but there's no alternative to actual leadership on the ground. People with charisma, people with leadership capabilities, people with reach across different factions that they can bring together. The regime in Tehran has been very good at decapitating any possible opposition movement. There are no such leaders, including, by the way, the previous Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, who's a big figure in the United States, but has no reach at all in Iran.
Right, and if he doesn't, then is there any legitimate opposition party in Iran, even if the regime falls out? Is there anyone who can lead Iran after that? And also I wanted to ask, President Trump is very focused on Iran right now, always comments coming in or posting in Truth Social something or another about Iran. So why do you think he is focused over there? Doesn't he have so much in U.S. to focus on? As of course the domestic political stuff will get him the votes, right? Not the people in Iran voting for him.
Yes, I mean, there's a school of thought that says that everything that President Trump does on the world stage is about deflecting attention away from his troubles at home in terms of domestic politics, whether it's the economy or the Epstein files or whatever the case might be. And there are others who see everything he does as another manifestation of American imperialism, grabbing Venezuelan oil. And perhaps that's what he's looking for. There's a long history of American interest in Iranian oil. Perhaps that's what's going on. I rather suspect it's a combination. Those two things matter to the president, but the bigger picture is geopolitical, balance of power. That regime has been a thorn in the side of America's friends and allies in the region for a long time, and there's every reason to believe that that's another important driver in all of Trump's thinking. So the geopolitics, the domestic politics, and perhaps the oil and economic interests, you put all of those together with his somewhat mercurial personality, and it's perhaps not surprising that when this issue pops in the global media, he reacts the way he's been reacting.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that, Professor Andrew Latham. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to Russia and Ukraine, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Russia remains open to peace talks on Ukraine, but described proposals focused only on a temporary ceasefire as not serious. Lavrov has highlighted that President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly signaled readiness for meaningful negotiations, particularly with parties prepared to present substantive proposals. He referenced previous meetings with U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, calling those discussions concrete and aimed at addressing the root causes of the conflict. He has also criticized European calls for a limited ceasefire, saying such efforts appear designed to give Kyiv time to strengthen its position rather than advance lasting peace. He also accused European powers of supporting Ukraine government aligned with Western interests and preparing for continued conflict with Russia. The comments come during a press briefing in Moscow with Namibian counterpart Selma Ashipala Musaivi, as Lavrov reaffirmed Russia's conditional openness to negotiations while emphasizing that a full peace settlement must address the underlying causes of the crisis. Let's listen into what the Russian foreign minister has shared.
Сейчас говорит европейцы постоянно, Германия, британцы тем более. Вот сейчас приоритет номер один – это перемирие. Перемирие там на 60 дней, на постоянной основе. Это все, конечно, несерьезно, хотя и с этими представителями мы готовы вести разговор. Но когда говорят, что кроме прекращения огня все остальное второстепенное, понятно, о чем идет речь. Речь идет о том, чтобы в очередной раз выторговать дополнительное время для того, чтобы поддерживать киевский режим, чтобы сохранить его сущность.
Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Andrew Latham. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how do you analyze the current situation of Russia, Ukraine towards peace? Are we close? Are we far? And also, what do you think when Lavrov highlights substantial or concrete developments and not temporary ceasefire? What does he mean?
Well, there are two big options on the table, pardon me. One of which is a peace settlement, which is definitive, ends the conflict, everybody gets something that they need or want, pardon me, and then it's peace in our time, to quote Neville Chamberlain. I think that's very unlikely. The bottom lines for both Kyiv and Moscow are completely incompatible. There's no middle ground. They both claim those territories in the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, and Crimea as well as an integral part of their country, and they are not willing to compromise at all on that. And of course, Ukraine wants security guarantees. Once upon a time within NATO, now NATO light, not NATO membership, but the same kind of Article 5 guarantee, an attack on one is an attack on all. And Russia considers that to be unacceptable. They want a demilitarized, neutralized Ukraine that belongs to no Western alliance and is not really very strong militarily. And of course, Ukraine has exactly the opposite interests. So a permanent peace settlement that addresses the core concerns of both parties, not on the table. What is on the table is a Korean-style ceasefire. In 1953, as a result of exhaustion more than anything else, the two sides, North Korea and China on the one side, South Korea and the United States and the United Nations on the other, decided enough was enough, and they decided on a ceasefire, meant to be temporary, which has now lasted to this day. The United States and South Korea are still technically at war with North Korea. But the ceasefire, temporary, has now lasted, 70 plus years. And in the context of that ceasefire, South Korea has done very well. It's become rich, it's become democratic, it's become a player in the region. If Ukraine could hope for something like that as a result of a Korean-style ceasefire, that wouldn't be the best option, but it would be a pretty good second best option. And for Russia, it would also address their concerns. So that's what I think is actually on the table. The question now is how you get from here, kinetic, armed, violent conflict, to there, guns drawn, still pointed at each other, but nobody shooting, and everybody satisfied, if not satisfied.
Right. Interesting. We will be eyeing that. Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing that insight and staying with us throughout our news. Now we move the focus on to Africa. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has held talks in Cairo with a senior advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump to discuss developments in Sudan. The meeting included Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati, Intelligence Chief Hassan Rashid, and the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy, Evgenia Sidrias, with discussions focused on restoring security and stability in Sudan. Sisi has emphasized Egypt's support for Sudan's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, warning against any attempts to undermine the country's security. He has also highlighted what he called the organic link between Egyptian and Sudanese national security, underlining that threats to Sudan could jeopardize wider regional stability. Both Egypt and the United States are part of a so-called Quad, along with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which coordinates international efforts to end the deadly conflict in Sudan, ongoing since April 2023. Between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces, which has killed thousands and displaced millions of people. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Ayanuga Olukbenga Paul. He's a public affairs analyst, joins us live from Lagos. Thank you very much, Mr. Paul, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, thank you. Now, what more can you tell us about this ongoing situation, and what is in the agenda of the talks between Egyptian President and U.S. President Donald Trump's senior advisor in Cairo?
Well, the talk is part of the ongoing effort to bring the crisis in Sudan to a halt, because the humanitarian crisis cannot be left unchecked, as it's putting a lot of strain on many of the African neighbors where this pillages from this violence is getting into. And don't forget that Egypt shares the entirety of southern Egypt is bordered by Sudan, and ensuring peace in Sudan will be part of national security strategy of Egypt to ensure that southern flank is protected. And the fact that these RSF forces have been able to, I mean, they control about 5 states out of the 18 states in the country, with government controlling only 13 states. So it shows that they get stronger by the day, and who knows, with Egypt does not want Yemeni, Saudi Arabia situation on their flank. So they had to put more pressure in this talk to ensure that mechanism to bring peace back to the region is put in place. And they are doing that along with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and the United States leading the force, because they strategically for business too. Sudan is very important as part of the this strait where all the ships that are going to Europe from Asia passes. So maintaining peace along that Red Sea corridor is very important for international business for both Europe and the US. And so this is um, an effort to ensure that putting all of the various interests into perspective, everybody needs peace, except for maybe the RSF that, wants to gain control of more territory before suing for peace, knowing fully well that once the ceasefire is called and there is an agreement in place, they might be allowed to take the land that, or to keep the land that they have already taken, and maybe form an independent sovereignty, which I know that the Sudanese government does not want. And that poses a serious challenge to the peace efforts that are being made thus far. So, but whether this will lead to, you cessation of violence is yet to be seen, because we've seen many agreements written before, signed, and immediately after signing the agreement, violence escalating in many regions. In fact, it's usually on the eve or immediately after the signing of new agreement that the RSF forces usually takes more territory or unleash more violence. So we are all hopeful that this recent renewed effort will yield some fruit.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Ayanugaluk Bengapol for joining us and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Now we move on to UK. British prosecutors are challenging a court's decision to drop a terrorism charge against Liam Ohana, a member of the Irish language punk rap group Kneecap. The Crown Prosecution Service is appealing a ruling that threw out a charge of supporting terrorism against Ohana, who performs as Mo Chara. He was accused of displaying a flag of the proscribed Iran-backed Lebanese militant group Hezbollah at a London concert in November of 2024. And in September, Woolwich Crown Court dismissed the charges due to a technical error in how it was brought under the 2000 Terrorism Act. Now we move the focus on to Pakistan. Pakistan has said that it had signed an agreement with a firm connected to World Liberty Financial, the crypto venture linked to US President Donald Trump's family, to explore the use of its USD1 stablecoin for cross-border payments. The Pakistan Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority said it had signed a memorandum of understanding with SC Financial Technologies, which it described as an affiliated entity of World Liberty. The agreement aims to facilitate dialogue and technical cooperation on emerging digital payment systems. The memorandum was announced during a meeting in Islamabad between Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and World Liberty co-founder and CEO Zak Witkoff. Witkoff and Pakistan's Finance Minister Muhammad Aurangzeb were seen signing the agreement, with Army Chief General Asim Munir also present. Under the deal, SC Financial Technologies will work with Pakistan's central bank to explore integrating the USD-1 stablecoin into a regulated digital payments framework, allowing it to operate alongside Pakistan's digital currency infrastructure. The announcement marks one of the first publicly disclosed partnerships between World Liberty and a sovereign state amid improving US-Pakistan relations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Jaijit Bhattacharya. He's an economist and finance expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhattacharya, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now Now looking at this, how could Pakistan's engagement with the US-linked stablecoin reshape its economic sovereignty, also monetary policy independence, and what political signal does this agreement send about Pakistan and US's relationship?
So I'm not sure whether it's going to lead to greater sovereignty of Pakistan on its finances, because clearly it's a path to a much faster dollarization of the Pakistani economy. Now, clearly Pakistan has been operating on a quid pro quo basis with the US and its relationship, especially after Operation Sindoor. And therefore, we are not really sure whether these steps are being taken because Pakistan believes it's in their interest, or they are doing it under duress. As we have seen in terms of other geopolitical engagements that the US has been undertaking, most of these engagements has had significant duress from the US side. So there is a background to believe that perhaps Pakistan is signing this agreement under duress. But there is nothing in public to really say that. The contextual explanation shows that there is perhaps something that is not benefiting Pakistan. And why it doesn't benefit Pakistan is because once you have got the token, which is USD1, it'll be much easier for Pakistanis to start using that token for all kinds of payments and remittances. And therefore, there is actually no need of holding Pakistani rupiah, the Pakistani rupees, which is fast losing its value. So people would like to hold on to the USD1, which, if it is backed by the US dollar as it is promised, would be a better store of value than the Pakistani rupee. And therefore, if people move towards USD1 as the token for exchange of value, for even buying day-to-day products, then there will be no control over the financial infrastructure of Pakistan, because the Pakistani rupee will not be the currency which will be used. And hence it's actually very risky for not just Pakistan but for any other economy to move into a token which is also not a government token. USD1 is not a government token, but if the Pakistani government is moving into a non-governmental token which is USD1, it is quite a risky move. And hence it'll be interesting to see how the whole relationship unfolds and how other challenges related to USD1 are taken care of, which includes challenges of money laundering, anti-terrorism actions, because it is very easy to use digital money to pay for terrorism or for money laundering, because it cannot be checked by the regular government infrastructure.
Right. And as you said, risky, and this is not a government's token. So how might this involvement of political families like the Witkoff family and the military in this deal affect Pakistan's domestic perceptions of transparency, governance, and regulatory capture? What do you think?
Well, from a Pakistani perspective, it appears to be business as usual, because there has never been a regulatory transparency in Pakistan, and it has been rife with conflicts of interest, wherein the chief of the army also becomes the head of the government, also controls the land, also controls the industry, and so on and so forth. So Pakistan has been rife with conflicts of interest. But it's interesting from an American perspective because for the first time we observe very significant conflict of interest where the ruling family, in that sense, is also controlling a very large business where the decisions from the US administration is going to impact how the business is run, which is the crypto business that we're talking about. It's also using its geopolitical heft to put pressures on governments such as the UAE to actually buy $2 billion worth of this token and use that to buy a stake in other crypto exchanges. And in this particular case, they bought stake into Binance using the USD1, which, and I'm sure that happened because the US government told them to do so. Now, these are clear conflicts of interest. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the regime changes in US. Will this particular US token still be viewed with the same amount of trust? Any currency is a currency only when people trust in it. If that trust goes away, then that currency vaporizes. Now, when that happens, as and when that happens, there'll be a lot of Pakistanis who would have put their money into this token, and their hard-earned money will vanish because there's nobody who's backing it up. And the interesting fact is that USD1 is supposed to be 1:1 with US dollar. So every $1 of USD1 is backed by a real $1. But the interesting part is even the real $1 is not backed by anything, which they are dealing from dollar way back in 1971 when Nixon dealing the US dollar from any asset. So you got an asset which is supposedly backed by another asset without any regulatory oversight, without any international regulations, and the underlying asset itself is not backed by anything. It's a very, very risky proposition, especially for a nation which is in fact having a severe financial crunch. If Pakistan believes that by somehow this is going to be a miracle way of getting out of the financial mess, well, that's not going to be the case. It's going to actually drag Pakistan further down in the financial mess that they are in.
Right. Thank you for highlighting it, Mr. Jayjit Bhattacharya, and joining us on NewsX World. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.